My name is Nora Williams. I'm 38 years old, a real estate consultant from Atlanta, and until a year ago, I believed my life was the definition of stable. A husband who worked in finance, a townhouse we'd renovated together, weekend dinners with friends, and a 5-year plan that looked solid enough to frame. I used to joke that I could read buildings the way other people read faces. Every crack in the paint, every uneven floorboard, told me something about a house's history. I trusted those instincts with my clients, but never thought to use them at home. Eric and I had been married for 9 years. We weren't perfect, but we were predictable, and I took comfort in that. Predictability felt safe. Then, last spring, Eric brought up the idea of buying another property. "It's an investment," he said over dinner, sliding a folder toward me like he was closing a deal. "A small place out near Brookfield. Market's about to explode out there. We can flip it in a year and make a decent profit." I remember the way he smiled, calm, persuasive, the same look he used when talking to clients. I didn't think twice. I handled real estate paperwork every day. This was my language. We'd done small deals before. Nothing risky. The photos he showed me were almost charming. A 2-story craftsman house with faded blue siding surrounded by oak trees. The kind of house that looked tired but hopeful, like it just needed attention. He wanted everything in my name, for tax reasons. It wasn't unusual. I was self-employed, and my credit was stronger. Still, I hesitated for half a second before signing. He noticed. "Don't you trust me?" he asked with a half laugh. Of course I did. We closed the deal within 3 weeks. The property was ours, or rather, mine. At first, it was exciting. We spent weekends driving out there with coffee and thermoses, walking through rooms that smelled of dust and old wood. Eric talked about paint colors and kitchen renovations like a man who'd just discovered a new hobby. He started keeping a small notebook for expenses, contractors, permits, deliveries. I didn't look too closely, assuming he had it under control. I was busy with my own clients, and honestly, it felt good to see him interested in something other than spreadsheets. Then, the visits started getting more frequent. At first, it was practical. He'd go check on the plumber or meet the carpenter, but soon he was there almost every other day. I'd call in the evening, and he'd answer from the car, claiming he was just leaving the site. I didn't question it, not at first, but little things began to stand out. He stopped sending me pictures of the progress. When I offered to come along, he always had an excuse. Too dusty, too noisy. The contractor was behind schedule. He started coming home later, carrying a faint scent that wasn't sawdust or paint, something floral, light, and unfamiliar. I told myself I was imagining it. Every couple goes through busy phases. One night, while folding laundry, I found a set of house keys in his jacket pocket. Not our home keys, the keychain was different. A small brass tag with the number 5 engraved on it. When I asked, he smiled easily. "Spare for the new place," he said. "You never know when you'll need to stop by." Something about his tone made me pause. A week later, I decided to visit the property on my own. It wasn't suspicion then, just curiosity. I wanted to see how far we'd come. It was a cloudy afternoon when I drove out to Brookfield. The neighborhood was quiet. Too quiet. A few houses sat empty, for sale signs leaning in overgrown grass. When I reached ours, the driveway gate was open. Inside, the house looked lived in. Not renovated, not abandoned, lived in. A half-empty coffee cup sat on the counter. There was a folded throw blanket on the couch and a vase with fresh lilies. The smell was the same faint floral scent I'd noticed on Eric's clothes. At first I thought maybe he'd set things up to stage the house for buyers, but the details were too personal. A woman's cardigan draped over a chair, a pair of flats by the door, a lipstick tube on the mantel. I stood there for a full minute before realizing I was holding my breath. Then I heard footsteps upstairs. The sound froze me. Not heavy, just soft movement, like someone pacing slowly. I called out, "Eric?" Silence. I climbed halfway up the stairs, but before I reached the landing, a door closed softly above me. My throat went dry. I turned and left, locking the front door behind me, though I wasn't sure who I was locking out anymore. On the drive home, my thoughts spun in circles. Maybe he'd hired a decorator. Maybe one of the contractors brought family over. Maybe I didn't want to know. When Eric came home that night, he acted normal, kissed me on the cheek, asked about my day, and never mentioned being at the house. I wanted to ask what he was hiding, but the words stuck somewhere between my ribs. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept seeing that house in my mind, the blanket, the shoes, the faint smell of lilies. It wasn't an investment anymore. It was something else entirely, and I had just signed my name on it. I didn't go back to the Brookfield house for nearly 2 weeks after that afternoon. Every time I thought about it, something in my stomach turned heavy, like the air itself thickened when I pictured that living room with the blanket and the lilies. Eric, on the other hand, acted as though the place barely existed. When I asked how the renovations were going, he'd shrug, change the subject, or hand me vague updates. Plumbers delayed, contractors behind, weather's messing with the roof work. He always had an excuse. I told myself to let it go. I had clients to handle, listings to close, deadlines to meet. But the mind doesn't forget what it can't explain. The voicemail came one Tuesday morning while I was preparing a listing file. A woman's voice, soft, casual, like a neighbor leaving a reminder. "Hi, Mrs. Williams? Just wanted to ask if your sister's still moving in this weekend. We saw your husband here again last night. I'll hold the spare keys for you, okay?" I remember the way the pen slipped from my hand when I heard it. I don't have a sister. I replayed the message 3 times. The voice sounded friendly, normal, but that normality made it even worse. There was no hint of malice, no suspicion. Whoever she was, she genuinely believed she was helping me. That night, I asked Eric if he'd been to the house. He didn't even blink. "Yeah, I stopped by. Needed to check on the HVAC guy." "And you went last night?" He nodded. "You got a problem with me working on our investment?" The tone stung sharp enough to shut me down. I didn't mention the voicemail. Not yet. The next morning, I drove out to Brookfield again. The road there felt longer this time. The sky was the same pale gray as the first day, the kind that hides the sun and dulls everything underneath. When I reached the house, the front gate was locked. I had my own key, though, and the moment I stepped inside, I knew things had changed. The coffee cup was gone, the couch cleared, the blanket folded neatly in a basket by the stairs. It was too clean now, deliberately arranged, like someone had scrubbed the evidence of life away. I walked slowly through the rooms, opening drawers, looking for something, anything that could tell me who had been there. The air still held that faint scent. Upstairs, one of the bedroom doors was closed. The handle felt cold when I touched it. Inside was a simple guest room bed made, curtains drawn, but the closet door stood slightly open. I pulled it wider and found a small stack of boxes. They weren't ours. Inside one, women's clothes, carefully folded. Inside another, toiletries, a photo frame face down. When I turned the frame over, my stomach knotted. It was a picture of Eric standing beside a woman with long auburn hair, both smiling, arms around each other. The photo looked recent, maybe taken within the last few months. Behind them was the same front porch of this very house. I sat down on the edge of the bed, holding the frame so tightly the glass creaked. My mind refused to process what I was seeing. Who was she? What did he tell her? What story had he built for her inside my house? Downstairs, my phone buzzed. A message. Unknown number. You left the door open again. Be careful next time. I froze. I hadn't left anything open. I looked at the front door. It was closed. I ran to the window. Outside, across the road, an older woman stood on her porch, watching me. When she saw me looking, she waved, friendly, almost apologetic. I stepped outside. "Hi," I called. "Did you leave me a message?" She smiled faintly. "Oh, you must be Nora. I've seen your husband around a lot. He said you'd be coming with your sister soon." I tried to steady my voice. "My sister?" "Yes, Emily. Sweet girl. She came by often." The name hit me like a slap. Emily. I remembered seeing it on one of Eric's old emails months ago, some property client he'd been working with. I hadn't thought much of it then. I thanked the woman, forced a polite smile, and walked back to my car before the tremor in my hands gave me away. That evening, I sat at the kitchen table staring at my laptop, the photo frames still in my bag. Eric came home late again, humming softly, pouring himself a drink. "Long day?" I asked. He nodded, loosened his tie, didn't look at me. I wanted to throw the photo at him, to scream, to demand an explanation, but I didn't. Not yet. I needed to be sure. So I did what I always do when something doesn't add up. I started researching. I looked up Emily Crane in our agency's old client files. There she was listed under Eric's portfolio last year, a purchase inquiry that never closed. But the strange part was the address listed under client residence. It was our Brookfield property. My chest tightened. I printed the record, folded it into my notebook, and hid it in my desk drawer. I didn't confront him that night, or the one after. Instead, I started noticing the smaller things, the new cologne he wore, the random absences, the calls he took outside. I waited. A week later, I got another message from the same number as before. "You left the upstairs light on again. Emily said you were coming back soon." That was it. I knew then that I wasn't imagining things. Someone, maybe Emily, was living a second life inside my house, and Eric was helping her do it. The next time I went to Brookfield, it wouldn't be out of curiosity. It would be for proof. By the time I drove to the Brookfield property again, my nerves felt like glass ready to shatter. I went alone, in the middle of a cold, gray afternoon. The road was silent, no neighbors outside, no passing cars, just that strange stillness that makes your own breathing sound too loud. This time, I didn't hesitate before unlocking the front door. The house was as quiet as before, but different, cleaner. The smell of lilies had faded, replaced by the faint chemical scent of fresh paint. He was covering tracks again. I moved through the rooms like a stranger, careful not to disturb anything. Then I stopped near the dining area, where the sideboard drawer stood slightly open. Inside, among receipts and old mail, was a brown envelope marked in Eric's handwriting. Property records. At first, it looked ordinary purchase agreement, title deed, renovation estimates. But halfway through the stack, I saw something that didn't belong. A second property agreement, nearly identical to ours, except one detail beneath my signature line. Another name had been added. Co-owner, Emily Crane. I felt the floor tilt beneath me. I stared at that name for a long time, as if maybe it would change if I blinked hard enough. But it didn't. It was there, printed and notarized. Another set of papers. Another version of reality where my husband had built a parallel story and given another woman half of my life. My hands shook as I kept turning the pages. There were more documents, renovation invoices addressed to Emily Crane and Nora Williams, as if we were partners, as if he deliberately tied our names together. Then something else, a second mortgage agreement, forged in my name. The signature wasn't mine, but close enough that a casual glance would have passed it. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. I dropped into a chair, the papers sliding across the table like scattered cards, each one revealing a darker truth. He hadn't just lied. He'd used me, my credit, my trust, my identity. I picked up my phone, opened his last text, and stared at it. I could confront him now, demand answers, scream, threaten, but what good would that do? He was too careful, too calm. He'd deny, deflect, twist everything until I was the one who sounded unstable. That was Eric's gift. He could make any lie sound reasonable. Instead, I called a contact from work, a quiet, reliable man named Marcus, who handled title verifications. "Marcus," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, "can you pull the ownership file for a property in Brookfield? 142 Hillcrest Lane. And don't log it under my name." He hesitated. "Sure thing. You okay, Nora?" "I just need to confirm something," I said, and hung up. That night, Eric was home early. He'd cooked dinner, steak, wine, candles. "Thought we could have a quiet night," he said. I smiled faintly, sat down, and pretended to eat. The smell of grilled meat made me sick. He asked about my day, about clients, about anything except the property. I watched him closely, the small details I'd ignored before, the way he checked his phone between bites, the slight smile when he read something on the screen. After dinner, he leaned back, sipping wine. "You should come with me to the house this weekend, see the progress." "Sure," I said softly. "I'd like that." Inside, I felt something shift. It wasn't fear anymore, it was resolve. 2 days later, Marcus called back. "Nora," he said carefully, "that property file, it's odd. There are dual entries in the registry system. Same lot number, 2 ownership trails, one in your name, and another where your husband filed for joint ownership with someone named Emily Crane." My throat tightened. "Are both active?" "Yes, which means, legally speaking, she owns half of it." "How?" "Looks like a private notarization. Someone inside the office must have pushed it through." He paused. "You want me to dig deeper?" I exhaled slowly. "Not yet." That night, I stayed awake in the living room, the house dark around me. I watched Eric sleep on the couch, phone clutched loosely in his hand. At 2 a.m., when he stirred and went upstairs, I quietly unlocked his phone using the fingerprint I'd memorized long ago. Messages, emails, a hidden folder in his photo app labeled Documents. Inside were scanned IDs, mine and hers. Same address, same property number. It was like watching my own life copied and rewritten under someone else's name. One photo stopped me cold. A selfie of Eric and Emily smiling in front of the Brookfield house. He'd written a caption under it, "Our home finally ready." Not the house. Our home. The next morning, I didn't speak to him. I packed my bag, told him I had client meetings all day, and drove straight back to the house. I started in the office room upstairs. In a locked drawer, behind a stack of folders, I found another envelope, smaller, older. Inside were photos, receipts for furniture, and handwritten notes in Eric's script. "Deliver couch for Emily. Keep Nora's name off initial payments." End quote. "Change utilities before she notices." Every line made my stomach turn. He had planned everything. Months of quiet deceit, paper trails, fake records, and forged signatures, all to create a second version of our marriage, one that excluded me. And the worst part? It worked. For months, I'd helped him do it without realizing it. I sat on the floor of that empty room, surrounded by proof of my own blindness, and felt something inside me harden. This wasn't just about love or betrayal anymore. It was about survival. He had built a trap using my name. Now I would dismantle it piece by piece, signature by signature. When I left the house that day, I didn't take the papers with me. I left them right there, in plain sight. I wanted him to know I'd seen them. Let him wonder when the walls around him would start closing in, because I wasn't going to confront him anymore. I was going to end the game quietly on my terms. After finding those papers, something inside me switched off. Fear was gone. Pain was gone. What was left was a calm, steady focus, the kind you get right before a storm. For 9 years, I had built my life around Eric's version of truth. I'd believed every word, defended every decision. I thought we were a team. But the truth? We were a project one, he managed quietly, efficiently, until I became another file in his drawer. 3 nights after finding the forged documents, I went back to the Brookfield house again. This time, I wasn't looking for more evidence. I was looking for answers. The moment I entered, the air felt heavier, as if the house itself carried the weight of secrets pressed into its walls. I walked straight to the study, turned on the lamp, and started checking every corner. I found more than I expected. Behind one of the bookshelves, the cheap pine one Eric had insisted on installing, there was a narrow gap. Something about the alignment looked wrong. I pushed gently, and the shelf shifted. Not much, but enough to show a space behind it. My heart pounded. I grabbed the edge and pulled harder until the shelf slid aside with a low creak. Behind it was a hollow section in the wall. Inside, boxes stacked neatly on top of each other, each one labeled in Eric's precise handwriting. Client A, Client B, Emily. I opened the one marked Emily. Inside were photographs, letters, receipts, a full record of her life, or at least the part of it he had controlled. I saw copies of her driver's license, her bank statements, even her medical records. And at the bottom, a birth certificate with a last name I didn't recognize. It hit me then, Emily Crane wasn't even her real name. My hands trembled as I pulled out a small journal. On the first page, written in careful script, were notes in Eric's handwriting again. Emily trusts easily, prefers routine, responds to reassurance. Fear of abandonment can be useful leverage. The words blurred before my eyes. He'd been studying her like a case file, like an experiment. I opened another box, labeled Client C. Inside were the same kind of records, but different faces, different women. One of the photographs caught my breath. A woman I vaguely recognized. I remembered seeing her once at a real estate seminar years ago. The note under her picture read, "Unstable. Avoid future contact. Transfer property early." And beneath that note was a printed obituary. She had died last year in an apparent accident. The room started spinning. My husband wasn't just cheating. He was collecting people. Women who trusted him, women he used through property deals, identity swaps, forged papers. And each one had disappeared quietly, like a chapter he'd finished writing. I sat there for a long time, numb, staring at the walls that hid his secret archive. Then I realized something that made my skin crawl. He had labeled one last box. The handwriting was the same. It said simply, "Nora." I didn't touch it at first. I couldn't. But curiosity is stronger than fear. Inside were my personal details, copies of my passport, my signature samples, property titles, even my will draft I'd left unsigned years ago, and a printed email draft addressed to me. "I never meant for you to find out this way. Everything I did was for us." There was no date, No signature. Just those words. That's when it hit me he'd planned an ending for me too. Maybe not death, but disappearance. A quiet transfer. A new file. A new version of me somewhere in his system, erased from the real one. For the first time in weeks, I felt fear crawl up my spine again. Not for what he'd done, but for what he still might do. I grabbed my phone, took photos of everything, the boxes, the notes, the forged documents. I copied files onto a USB drive from the small laptop he'd left in the office. Then I noticed a small sound from upstairs, faint, deliberate footsteps. He was here. I froze. The air felt like ice. I didn't move, didn't breathe. The creaking stopped for a second, then started again closer, slower, like he was listening. I turned off the lamp and stepped into the hallway, pressing myself against the wall. The floorboards above me creaked once more, then fell silent. After a long moment, I heard the faint sound of a door closing, then a car engine starting outside. He was gone. I waited another full minute before I moved again. My legs felt like they didn't belong to me. I locked the door, double-checked the windows, and left with the USB drive hidden in my coat. That night, I sat in my car outside our home, watching the light in our bedroom window. He was inside, calm, composed, scrolling through his phone as if nothing had changed. I realized then that he had no idea I knew, and that ignorance was my only weapon. The next morning, I went to my bank. I transferred every shared fund we had into an account under my own legal business name. Then I called my lawyer quietly, told him I was preparing to sell a property, but not to contact my husband about it. In less than 48 hours, Brookfield would no longer belong to Eric. It would belong to me, fully and legally. He had used property as his weapon control disguised as trust. Now it would be the key to his downfall. I didn't confront him that night. I just smiled when he kissed me goodnight and whispered, "Everything okay?" And I said, "Perfect." Because sometimes silence is the loudest revenge there is. Morning light slipped through the curtains, soft and ordinary, as if the world hadn't shifted beneath my feet. Eric was already up, standing by the kitchen counter in his usual quiet rhythm, coffee brewing, phone on speaker, a hint of a smile playing on his lips. The man looked exactly the same blue shirt, the same calm voice. But now I could see what was behind that smooth surface calculation. Patterns, precision. He didn't know that the floor beneath his life was already cracking. I acted as though nothing had changed. We had breakfast together. I laughed at his small talk, nodded when he mentioned another meeting at the property. He said he'd be gone all afternoon. I told him to take his time. When the door closed behind him, I exhaled slowly. The house went still. Then I made the call. "Marcus," I said quietly, "I need those ownership transfers processed today. Use the file I sent you yesterday, the new documents, not the old ones, and lock them under my name only." He paused. "Are you sure you want to do this without your husband's signature?" "Yes," I said. "Completely sure. Just file it under private settlement." By the time I hung up, my pulse was steady. For months, he had been rewriting my life on paper. Now I was rewriting his. I drove to the Brookfield property one last time. The air was heavy, thick with the scent of wet grass after rain. Everything looked deceptively calm, the house standing quiet, the gate slightly open. Inside, the living room was spotless. Too spotless. On the table lay a single envelope, unsealed. I didn't touch it at first. I just stared. Then I opened it carefully. Inside was a handwritten note. "Nora, I thought you'd understand by now. This house was meant for both of us, a new start, a better version of what we had. You weren't supposed to find it this way. Don't make this difficult. Just walk away. My fingers went cold. He knew I'd been here. He was watching me. The faint sound of tires on gravel made me turn. His car pulled up outside. He stepped out, calm as ever, no rush in his movement, the look of a man in control. When he entered, his smile didn't waver. "You shouldn't be here alone," he said softly. "It's not safe." "For who?" I asked. His eyes flicked to the sideboard where the files had been. They were gone, and he noticed instantly. His face didn't change, but his posture did. The air between us tightened. "You've been going through my things," he said. "I had to," I replied. "It's my house." He gave a short laugh. "Ours, actually. Not anymore." For the first time, his expression cracked. "What did you do, Nora?" "I fixed what you broke." I walked toward the door slowly, keeping my voice calm. "The property's no longer in your name. The accounts are closed. Everything you built here, it's over." He stepped closer. "You think you can outplay me? After everything I did for you?" I met his eyes. "You didn't do it for me. You did it to me." Something dark flickered across his face, the mask slipping for just a second, enough to show the truth underneath. Then, slowly, he smiled again. "You've always underestimated me." He reached into his coat pocket and tossed a small silver flash drive onto the table. "You think you're the only one with copies?" My heart hammered, but I didn't move. He leaned forward slightly. "You take what's mine, I take what's yours. Fair, isn't it?" His words were smooth, but his tone was colder now. The distance between us was closing. Then my phone buzzed. I didn't look down, but I knew what it was, a message from Marcus. "Transfer confirmed. Ownership registered under your name only." I finally smiled. "Fair enough," I said, "except you no longer have anything to take." His jaw tightened. The confidence drained just a little, replaced by something else, disbelief. He turned toward the window, exhaled, and muttered, "You don't know what you've done." But I did. For once, I was one step ahead. I left him standing there, still and silent. As I walked out, I placed my own envelope on the counter, one I'd prepared the night before. Inside was a copy of his hidden records, the documents linking him to forged signatures and fake identities, and a single line written in my hand. "Some properties appreciate, some rot from the inside. The trick is knowing when to sell before you lose everything." I never saw Eric again after that day. 2 weeks later, I received a call from a private investigator I'd quietly hired to trace Emily Crane. She had vanished last year, but her family had been looking for answers ever since. When I shared what I'd found, they reopened the case. Eric's name began surfacing in the paperwork, slowly, quietly, until his carefully constructed world started unraveling. The police called me once, asking for a statement. I told them what I knew. Not everything, but enough. The Brookfield property eventually sold. I kept none of the furniture, none of the traces of his life. I had the walls repainted, the floors replaced. Sometimes I drive past the area and wonder how I could have been so blind, how love can turn into paperwork, how promises can be filed away like transactions. But then I remember that night, the calm in my voice when I told him it was over, and I realized that the house wasn't the only thing he underestimated. He'd built an empire of lies, but he forgot one simple rule. When you forge a foundation, it always collapses under its own weight. And as for me, I learned to read more than buildings. Now I can read people too, their cracks, their corners, their weak spots. I don't sell houses anymore. I sell closures. Because sometimes the only way to survive a property affair is to sign the last document yourself and walk away before someone else writes your ending.